Adelante. Listo, ya está la transmisión.
Maybe Patricia, you can start since you represent Udwalk in this session. Uh, Thank you.
Gracias, muy buenos días a todos. Deseamos tengan un buen día. A nombre del doctor Roberto Escalante, secretario general de la Unión de Universidades de América Latina, les damos la más cordial bienvenida a esta serie de webinars globales encaminados a reflexionar sobre acciones para un futuro colectivo. Daremos inicio, como saben, con el tema Tiempos extraordinarios exigen iniciativas extraordinarias. Este espacio es un lugar de encuentro y diálogo e intercambio de conocimientos e iniciativas diversas organizadas, como sabemos, por el International Panel on Social Progress, el Instituto de Investigaciones Sociales de la UNAM, la Academia Brasileira de Ciencias y la Universidad también BRAC, la Inter-American Network of Academies of Science, y el CIPEC, el Global Solutions y por supuesto la UDUAL, con la participación de destacados académicos de diferentes puntos del mundo. Hoy más que nunca, nuestras acciones colectivas pueden marcar la diferencia solo a través de una visión compartida. La empatía, la colaboración decidida, podemos orientar de esta manera hacia un mundo en una era de paz, equidad y sostenibilidad. La sesión inaugural del seminario web New Horizons revisará los principales desafíos que enfrenta el mundo actualmente y explorará caminos hacia un futuro mejor. Los oradores aportarán su amplia formación académica y una rica experiencia en asesoramiento político en ámbitos nacionales e internacionales, así como en iniciativas de la sociedad civil. Desde la UDUAC tenemos plena confianza que este webinar aportará a la comunidad grandes ideas. Enhorabuena y agradecemos su presencia. Sean todos bienvenidos.
Bueno, creo que me toca dar la bienvenida a mí, a nombre del Instituto de Investigaciones Sociales, decir que la relación del Instituto de Investigaciones Sociales a través de mi persona con el panel internacional para el progreso social es estratégica para el instituto y para la UNAM. La UNAM siendo una de las mayores universidades públicas del mundo, y comprometida con el papel de universidad pública, de generar ideas, de generar nuevos paradigmas que son absolutamente necesarios para revertir las crisis múltiples que atraviesa el mundo y particularmente la región latinoamericana, la región más desigual del mundo, la región donde el deterioro ambiental es más acelerado, la región que junto con África han vivido larguísimas historias de extractivismo de recursos naturales y financieros. Entonces, confiamos que desde esta región del mundo, desde el sur global, en el marco del apoyo de la UDUAC, la UNAM forma parte, es una institución adscrita a la Unión de Universidades de América Latina y con la asociación del Panel Internacional para el Progreso Social, podemos contribuir a generar nuevos paradigmas, respuestas que son urgentes en este momento. No tengo mucho más que decir, doy la bienvenida a los participantes, lo agradezco y agradezco muy especialmente el acompañamiento y la inspiración del doctor Marc Florbay y del Panel Internacional para el Progreso Social. Muchas gracias.
Bueno, creo que es mi vez ahora, ¿no? Desde Río de Janeiro doy las bienvenidas a todos y voy a cambiar en inglés. I'm very glad to be here and to be part of this conversation that we launched today. Personally, I am with IPSP for a long time, and I think we have progressed now that we included also other participants than just academics. I think that's a very good thing. I mean, we have people from civil society and other institutions which share with us the commitment to democratic values of justice, freedom, and equality. And let me say that loyal to such principles is what is behind the willingness of the Brazilian Academy of Science to join the team behind the global webinar. We know that progress is under heavy attacks in this historical juncture. As if existential risks were not enough to threaten progress, we see democracy under attack all over, even where checks and balances were supposed to be firmly grounded. But as Robert McFarlane reminds us, with respect to the need for ecological action, despair is a luxury and hope is a discipline. Actually, I would rephrase their sentence, and I would say that conformisms are not acceptable, and in ethical terms, it's not morally sustainable. I don't want to take time from the relevant discussion to take place today, so let me just take the opportunity to thank UNAM and our Mexican partners who are key actors in these adventures. Thanks also to all of those directly involved in the New Horizons Global Webinar, and thanks to all those present here today. May our dialogues fertilize ideas and stimulate initiatives to carry on progressive moves. Thank you.
I would also like to welcome everyone on behalf of the International Panel on Social Progress. My name is Marc Florbet, and indeed I would first like to thank our founding partners in this initiative. They have been listed by Patricia in the beginning, so I won't repeat the list, but it's a great group of partners representing a wide set of stakeholders and thinkers and actors, and especially with a good representation of the Greater South. Which is indeed quite important in the current situation. Let me just say briefly that the International Panel on Social Progress is a global network of researchers and actors that strives to open pathways for better societies by developing and encouraging social innovations based on core values of peace, freedom, and justice. This partnership and this webinar enable us to have important exchanges of ideas in a critical time for humanity and for the planet, as my colleagues have already said. The mounting challenges of social and political fragmentation, environmental degradation, technological and economic uncertainties call for a large mobilization of goodwill, if I may say, from all thinkers and actors. The title of this session, Extraordinary Times Call for Extraordinary Initiatives, sums up the main motivation for this webinar, and I very much look forward to the productive results coming out of these talks and conversations. I would like to strongly encourage the members of our audience today to spread the word about this webinar, and all sessions will be available in replay in the two languages, English and Spanish. Let me now introduce the moderator of this inaugural session. We have the honor and pleasure to have Hossein Zillur Rahman with us, who will moderate the session. He's an economist and a political sociologist. He is the founder and chairman of Power and Participation Research Center, a think tank that is based in Dhaka, Bangladesh, and is also the chairperson of BRAC, which is the world's largest NGO. He has held important positions in the government of Bangladesh and in international commissions, and I won't give the long list here. I just want to highlight the fact that he played an important role in the return of Bangladesh to democracy. His work as an intellectual covers most of the key issues this webinar aims to address: poverty, inclusive growth, well-being and social policy, power and governance, institutional transformation, justice, and community development. So Hossein, over to you, and thank you so much for your leadership in this session.
Thank you, Mark, and hello and greetings from Dhaka, Bangladesh. We have an exciting hour and a half in front of us on this inaugural session of our New Horizons Global Webinar, Extraordinary Times Call for Extraordinary Initiatives. We have four very distinguished speakers in this session. First is Gala Diaz-Lango. She's the Executive Director of the Center for the Implementation of Public Policies for Equity and Growth, in short CIPEC, Argentina, and she was a founding member of the Global Coalition on Social Protection Floors. Then we have Romina Buarini, Director of the Wellbeing, Inclusion, Sustainability and Equal Opportunity Center, in short WISE, at OECD, where previously she launched a Business for Inclusive Growth, a coalition of 40 multinationals committed to fight inequalities. We also have with us Claire Mellier, who is co-founder and organizer, Global Citizens Assembly, and also the knowledge and practice lead at the ISWE Foundation. Finally, we have Pedro Conce Sao, Director of the Human Development Report Office in UNDP. Apologies if I haven't pronounced your names correctly. We'll now move on to the session, and we have structured it in a round one, followed by a moderated exchange among the panelists, followed by a round two, and finally a Q&A session. So let's start with round one. Each speaker has 8 minutes, and I'm posing like trigger questions for them to get started for this first round. And we'll start with Gala Diaz-Lango. Gala, Latin America is facing a reality of polycrisis. How do you see this playing out? Are limits emerging on the corrective scope of state intervention and international cooperation? Is social disaffiliation at both micro and macro levels a newer and greater challenge to our collective problem-solving capacity? Gala, your time, 8 minutes.
Many thanks, Hussein. I will now turn to Spanish porque entiendo que la mayoría de los asistentes son hispanoparlantes. Así que, en primer lugar, gracias por la invitación. Es un honor aportar la perspectiva desde América Latina a este debate. Y claramente vivimos tiempos extraordinarios, como menciona el título de la sesión. Y esto no es solo por la superposición de crisis que es evidente, sino también porque estas crisis revelan fracturas mucho más profundas en nuestras sociedades. Y América Latina creo que es una región muy interesante para entender mejor esta naturaleza. América Latina, por un lado, personifica lo que se discute como policrisis, ¿no? Esta superposición de distintas crisis. Tenemos un estancamiento en el crecimiento económico, tenemos una desigualdad rampante que viene en aumento y que la pandemia implicó ahí un salto grande. Tenemos democracias bastante debilitadas, tanto en las instituciones formales, pero sobre todo en los principios y valores que sustentan a las instituciones formales, y obviamente una gran exposición y vulneración ante la crisis climática, ¿no? Lo que me parece interesante notar es que en estas múltiples crisis, al igual que en otras, lo que comparten es una causa común, que es la desafiliación, una crisis en la afiliación. Esto es la erosión de los vínculos que conectan a las personas con las instituciones, pero también a las personas entre sí, a las personas con las comunidades, con las familias, no solo con las instituciones formales. Con las instituciones formales eso lo vemos de una manera muy clara. Por ejemplo, en América Latina, la confianza en los gobiernos es del 28%, en comparación con el 47% a nivel mundial. Y en Argentina solamente 17% de las personas confían en el gobierno. Pero esto no se ve solamente en esta menor confianza, también se ve después en la menor, por ejemplo, participación electoral que tenemos o en una caída en las tasas de sindicalización o de afiliación religiosa o incluso también en un nivel mucho más micro en el aumento de la sensación de soledad que tienen las personas en América Latina y también después en las decisiones que toman respecto de sus propias vidas, por ejemplo, en la decisión de conformar una familia, de casarse, de tener hijos, etcétera. Estas dinámicas no solamente son problemáticas en sí mismas en muchas dimensiones, sino que instrumentalmente son complejas. Son tendencias que nos llevan hacia un mayor individualismo y esto socava obviamente nuestra capacidad de acción colectiva para resolver problemas. Los problemas que enfrentamos, volviendo a la definición de policrisis, son problemas complejos, lo que en inglés se conoce como wicked problems. Son problemas que son multidimensionales, son problemas que son interdependientes entre sí, entre estas distintas dimensiones, pero también son problemas que son dinámicos, van cambiando y van cambiando la forma en la que se afectan entre sí. Es imposible resolver problemas de esta naturaleza sin un accionar articulado entre distintos actores. Y las tendencias que estamos viendo de un individualismo creciente y una crisis en el actuar comunitario y articulado son un obstáculo concreto para que podamos resolver de forma eficiente estos problemas. El individualismo, por más virtuoso que pueda llegar a ser en algunos casos, no es eficiente para resolver problemas de esta naturaleza. Mencionaba Hussein la pregunta sobre el accionar estatal. Y esta policrisis es probablemente una demostración muy concreta de los límites de la intervención estatal y cómo por sí sola no ha logrado resolver buena parte de estos problemas. Por supuesto que creo que también habla de qué tan eficientes son nuestros estados y creo que estamos en un momento de la historia donde tenemos que plantear esta pregunta de, ¿es el Estado, por lo menos han sido los estados, y por ahí limitándonos exclusivamente a América Latina, han sido los estados latinoamericanos capaces de resolver los problemas que enfrentaban su población en los últimos años? Muy probablemente la respuesta sea no. Muy probablemente la respuesta nos lleve a pensar que necesitamos estados más inteligentes, estados más eficientes en términos también de resolver los problemas de manera concreta, así como también en el uso de sus recursos. Y estas restricciones que han enfrentado los estados en América Latina probablemente respondan también a restricciones políticas que se han visto en nuestros países en los últimos años. Lo cierto también es que muchos de estos problemas son problemas que atraviesan fronteras y es imposible que un Estado pueda domésticamente resolver, por ejemplo, la crisis climática, ¿no? Yendo a un extremo de una obviedad. Eso coloca sobre la mesa la necesidad de una articulación multilateral mucho mayor. En lugar de reforzar el accionar multilateral y de tender a generar puentes que sirvan para acciones concretas de una manera articulada entre distintos países que puedan ser soluciones para resolver estos problemas, lo que estamos viendo en los últimos meses es un avance en la dirección opuesta, ¿no? Un socavamiento del multilateralismo, una crisis en la cooperación internacional, no solamente en el financiamiento de la cooperación internacional, que eso es evidente a partir de los retrocesos que vimos en Estados Unidos y también de muchos de los países europeos migrando buena parte de su apoyo a la cooperación internacional a presupuestos de defensa, sino que desde una manera más política, incluso el multilateralismo en sí se está viendo debilitado con un vaciamiento de espacios de negociación en Naciones Unidas, en el G20 y en todos los grandes foros que hay a nivel mundial. Este vacío profundiza la desafiliación en un nivel macro. Simplemente para cerrar en este último minuto que me queda, creo que es necesario mirar estas múltiples crisis y estos múltiples desafíos que enfrentamos con una mirada de cómo podemos ir reconstruyendo la afiliación, el sentido de pertenencia, de entender que estamos todos en el mismo barco y si este barco no llega a un buen puerto, nos vamos a hundir todos. Esto implica regestar la confianza que está rota tanto entre personas e instituciones como entre personas entre sí. Esa es una condición de habilitación que es previa para cualquier tipo de acción colectiva y para que esa acción colectiva sea eficaz tanto en la escala individual, comunitaria, nacional como global. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you. Gracias, Carla. We now move to Romina Buarini. From your vantage point of promoting beyond GDP agenda at OECD, do you see any turning point in global priority setting towards well-being and human flourishing? Which organized actors are showing the potential to move the needle? Romina.
Thank you so much, Simon, for the question and the introduction, and thanks to the organizers for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be in this conversation today. And what I find very, very inspiring is the fact this is a truly global conversation. So it's really bringing perspectives from sort of different regions of the world that are possibly navigating very similar challenges. I think in order to answer your question, I have to say a couple of words about the work that we're doing in the OECD and in particular in the WISE Center, which was created a few years ago to ensure that policymakers could focus their minds on promoting people's well-being, really as the main, mission of their sort of public policy sort of activities. It was important, and in a way, it sounds like this is almost a sort of taken for granted that if governments are there, they're there to ensure that people's lives is made better every day, and this is done obviously in a way that is equitable and really sort of takes into consideration all existing divides. But the reality is that I think for very, very many years, the focus in public policy was a little bit different. Of course, this is a very general statement, so I would have to sort of qualify it a bit. Let's say that at least in economic policy, a lot of the emphasis was sort of put on this idea that we have to grow the pie, we have to make sure that the economy is running well, and then rest, will magically happen. And the reality is that the sort of economic growth doesn't necessarily go hand in hand with social progress. And this is why in the OECD, but of course in many other places, and actually in countries, in governments, of course in civil society and in many other places, people started realizing that we have to look at the problem in a different way, and we need to start measuring sort of success and performance going beyond the traditional sort of metrics of economic performance. And this is when we started talking about sort of well-being, and we tried to change the narrative and say, okay, now let's really try to understand what matters to people's well-being individually, but also to the community's well-being. So I think the point that was just made about the importance of going beyond sort of an individualistic sort of vision of the world is really important here. So to answer to your question, are global policy priorities shifting towards well-being? I would say that probably the answer is mixed in the sense that there are a number of very interesting attempts and I think very interesting initiatives that actually show the willingness of some countries. They show the willingness of the international community to do more in terms of putting well-being at the forefront of the attention, the policy attention. But of course, the reality is a little bit more challenging and complicated. So I think this is pretty clear. So let me perhaps highlight more concretely sort of some of these positive initiatives and to share this, with the broader audience today, and perhaps also reflect in terms of how those existing initiatives can be made a little bit more effective. So I think it's interesting to say that in OECD countries, so the OECD countries are mainly, let's say, countries that are very, very developed from an economic point of view, a social point of view. But that's typically the conversation around how do we understand development, right? So it's not just definitely in terms of GDP. Nevertheless, OECD countries are the ones that have the highest levels of GDP per capita. And in those countries, which are the one we are more actively sort of engaging with, the well-being work and very, very concrete initiative in terms of measuring, monitoring well-being, but also actually introducing well-being in the policy making. Actually, that trend has been increasing, and I think this is a very positive news. So, today we have the very large majority, more than 2/3 of OECD countries, that are actually sort of practicing in some way, the well-being work, meaning that they are actually, putting a lot of resources, statistical resources, policy resources into the understanding of what is shaping people's well-being, but also, what the concrete solutions can be put forward. And that is interestingly something that we're seeing at all levels of the state. So it's not just the national federal governments, but very often is actually, the local administration, place-based sort of entities that are using those well-being tools. This is positive, and I think it's actually building momentum politically. Of course, it sends some very good signals, but it's also positive because it is actually building capacity on I would say technical level, and this is, I think, important to remind ourselves, because policymakers, governments obviously also have to juggle many, many different things. So when tools are there, they have data, they have mechanisms, very concrete mechanisms. They understand how policy evaluation should be done based on well-being, as opposed, to standard economic policies, I would say, or indicators. I think this is obviously helping quite a lot. I also wanted to share as a very positive news that the international community is actually keeping the focus on this. And in particular, there have been two important initiatives that I want to recall today. One is the creation of the UN High-Level Expert Group on Measuring Beyond GDP, which follows the mandate of the Path for the Future. This is a group that is going to operate, for at least a couple of years, and it will, produce some important recommendations for the international community. So again, this is building on long-term, sort of standing work, but it's also adding, I think, to the momentum. So it's important because it can really reinvigorate the international conversation on this. The other initiative was launched in Sevilla at the Financing for Development conference just in June, and it's the creation of a global alliance on beyond GDP. So again, the vision is very similar. The idea is really sort of to understand how new metrics beyond GDP can actually inform the practice of international development, and so to perhaps to sort of sum up that part of my interventions. What I wanted to say is that this is showing that some policy leaders actually are very actively looking into this. This is, true domestically, but it is also true internationally. So, it's very important. The OECD is obviously supporting all of these efforts. And I also wanted to share that we have created last year, we call it a working party on well-being. So it's an OECD bodies which brings together all the country representatives, so all the experts in the countries that actually are working with those well-being tools. And so this is a community practice that essentially is trying to advance very, very concretely this agenda. Obviously, it's not just for governments to change and actually to sort of, to move the needle. All actors need to be included. We did a lot of work to actually understand how business in the private sector, investors are actually also contributing to that, or can contribute to that. There again, there are a lot of solutions, concrete levers that can be pulled from different directions. Maybe I'll come back in the second round of interventions, but just to say that it's what really matters at this page, to face, the big challenges of this time is obviously a very, very tight, strong coordination among the actors. So, each actors can do something and something quite big, but what really matters is how those actors come together and can be brought together. So the policy dialogue is always, quite key in making sure that the coordination is actually achieving the goal of promoting people's well-being. So I leave it here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Romina, for that interesting observations. And I think in the second round, we'll take this up to some extent. Can I now come to Claire Miller? And the question for you that I prepared is, how important are bottom-up initiative to arrest the democratic slide that you're witnessing around the world? What potential does civil society have, and how do you see it in your own work to create new voices and reshape the democratic discourse? Claire, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Hussein. I've got a few slides I'll share with you, if that's okay.
Sure.
So thank you so much for this invitation to talk about the challenges we face in current political systems, and also the seeds of change we witness. And that's partly one of the motivation for being involved in IPSP for me, is the diagnosis has been done. We know there's the rise of authoritarianism, and there's no denying that. What we need to understand is what's coming, what are the seeds of regenerative democracy, and that's why I'd like to talk about briefly now. So the governance challenges posed by the polycrisis require institutional innovation, and we know that the bridge between the governed and the government is broken. The vast majority of our political leaders are trapped in a system that sets them adrift from the very people they're supposed to represent. And at the same time, we know there's demand for political system change, and the surveys are showing that very clearly. And as I said, there are seeds of regenerative democracy. And what I'm currently working on developing is a process of deliberative democracy at the global level. And I'll tell you a bit more about that in a moment. In terms of the peak demand for political system change, various surveys, whether it's from Pew Research or more recently Earthroll, are showing that people are desperate for that political system change. But what we're missing is actually the demonstration, the examples at scale that this is happening. And here I'm using the Bill Moyer Movement Action Map to show where I think we are currently in terms of showing, these opportunities that are emerging. I think there's strong public awareness about the problem, but there's a strong public opposition to power holders and policy, but there's at the moment low support for the alternatives. And the work we're doing with Citizens Assembly is actually showing this trend. It's happening. This movement is building, but it's not, people are not aware of it enough. There's not enough awareness of this. And where we're at the moment is a shift from government as usual, democratic innovation happening, but not what I would call governance system change. So creating new institutions that are becoming permanent, are changing the system truly. There are many, many examples around the world of these different phases we're going through. And I would say, in my opinion, what we're seeing, for instance, with permanent citizens assemblies, whether it's in Ireland or Bogota, or in our case, what we're trying to do with the Global Citizens Assembly, are example, but also we need to be aware of all these examples in the Global South, which are not, Global North, focused, that are also showing that democracy is not a Western, concept. So briefly, what's the Global Citizens Assembly and what are we trying to do? Back in 2021, 4 years ago, for COP26, we initiated the first Global Assembly, which was the first time the Citizens Assembly model was taken to the global level. And we received the backing from Antonio Guterres, which said that this was an example of people power and how to build solidarity. We are now taking the Global Citizens Assembly to the next level by trying to make it a permanent institution. And we're working with various actors and institutions, but specifically with the Brazilian government, who is, through the Global Mucharo, trying to really bring the concept of people power into the COP process and embedding a citizen track as a legacy of COP30. And that's what we're trying to support with the Global Citizens Assembly. And there are many ways that we're trying to do that. And one of the ways is to embed deliberation in communities by supporting them to look at how to address polarization in their community and supporting them with the tools and the methods and the practical support to do that. And there are 4 key components to the Global Citizens Assembly. One is what we call the community assemblies, which are very much bottom-up participatory assemblies that are completely self-initiated. And that's what we did for COP26, and we're learning from that and building upon that. The second element is what we call the civic assembly, which is a global mini-public, which is the traditional citizens' assembly model, which is in this case will run from January until March next year and will feed into the COP cycle. And that was the picture of the 100 assembly members from COP26. We've got also a campaign culture, trying to bring this initiative into popular culture, working with artists and activists and movements. And finally, we've got a coalition of actors that are supportive of this initiative, and IPSP is one of them, but the Brazilian government as well, and government of Vanuatu and many others, and CEW and other members of IPSP as well. And so what I wanted to do with this presentation is briefly show you, in our case, as practitioners in the field of democratic innovation, how we are trying to bring these seeds of regenerative democracy into popular culture and make them much more mainstream. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Claire, for that. And we have our 4th and final speaker in this first round is Pedro Conceição. Is Pedro here? Yes. Welcome,
yes,
Pedro.
hi, Hussein.
Hi. Well, the question I have you is a very simple one. Do the recent series of HD reports, which you have been leading, do they draw a pathway to a better future? Can human development and the health of the planet be reconciled, of the nature?
Thank you, Hussein.
2 trigger questions.
Well, I hope that the reports will help us to find a way. But let me share some reflections on what we've been doing and how we hope that they will help to understand or interpret the turbulent world we are living in. So I think Claire alluded to this already a little bit. In a nutshell, if I had to find an expression to characterize our current context, I would say that we are living in a world in which there is a mismatch between very rapid transformational changes happening in many domains, and the kind of institutions at different scales, at different levels, that we have in place to respond. So scales go from perhaps the local all the way to the international multilateral context. And the kind of challenges that I have in mind, of course, there are multiple, but we've been concentrating over the last 3 human development reports, or the last 2 and the one that we're currently working on 3. One has to do with the context of political polarization. The second, rapid technological change, particularly associated with artificial intelligence. And then the third, which is the topic of the report we're currently working on, that we aim at publishing next year, and with a preview of some of the thinking for that report that will enable me to answer your last question, Hussein, on whether it's possible to sort of reconcile human development with sustainability in a sense. That 2026 Human Development Report will be about a dangerous planetary change and how that shapes prospects for human development. So again, political polarization, AI to simplify, and planetary change are the kind of environmental changes that are putting stress on our institutions to respond, on our societies, if we want to use a broader framing. So one of the things that we found in our report on polarization, which I would like to bring into the conversation, is the fact that perhaps we haven't examined or haven't given enough salience to understanding what are the drivers of the support that underpin some of the challenges that we are seeing to the political systems and to the political leadership that we see in many parts of the world. And here I think when I say institutions, I don't mean principles or ideals. For instance, in that report, we document something called the democracy paradox, which relies on data from the World Value Survey to tell us that internationally around the world, people, 90% of the population or respondents to the survey consistently have demonstrated support to democracy as a principle. So people are behind democracy as an ideal. But over the last few years, there's also been an increase in the support of people, the share of respondents that would support a leader that may not comply with these democratic ideals, including not respecting decisions of the parliament, for instance, or the outcome of elections. And in fact, in the last survey, more than half of the global population would support such leaders. So that's why we called it the democracy paradox. It's not like people are alienated by the ideal of democracy, but at the same time, they exhibit a preference for leaders that may undermine it. And this is then reflected in patterns of political polarization that are making collective action, at different scales, more difficult to achieve. And I can share some of our findings on what's driving this or contributing to this, but in a nutshell, a lot of it seems to emanate from perceptions or reality of living in a world that is insecure. So either people live in contexts that are insecure, or they perceive the world as being a very, very insecure place. And so I'm concluding to come back to the second part of your question. So it's in this context that we are arguing in the 2026 Human Development Report that when we think about sustainability, planetary challenges, it's important to supplement narratives on the action, on the narratives that are being mobilized to have political leaders and society respond to sustainability challenges that are premised on narratives of fear, of limits or constraints or imminent catastrophic change, with approaches that are mobilizing action from a perspective that seeks to mobilize human aspirations for a better world, to simplify it. So this is not to then downplay the science that the risks exist, but the argument is that that as a driver of action and as a way of bringing people together seems to be faltering. So our idea is to see if we can come up with what we call an aspirational approach to our planetary futures, in which human progress, advancing human development, is seen as something that is not inherently destructive of nature or of the planet. Now, this is not that to deny that it has happened, and it's not even to make a prediction that it will get better in the future, but it's raising the possibility that it may happen, right? That people are not inherent destroyers of nature. There's nothing inherent of us in us that would drive us to that behavior. And so what kind of tools, what kind of instruments can we put on the table to enable us to understand if we move in that direction? So I can say a bit more either in the Q&A or perhaps in a second round on our ideas. Thank you.
Thank you, Pedro. So I think we have had a very interesting articulation from different perspectives. And in this segment of, let's say, about 12 to 15 minutes, what I would really like is the four speakers to interact with each other. And I'm posing sort of a few questions for them. I mean, what I saw is from the four vantage point that you are coming at from, each of you have different institutional sort of vantage point. Is the reading of the reality, is there, is that an area of contention? For example, Pedro just now highlighted the issue of political polarization as a key feature. Gala actually highlighted the issue of disaffiliation. Are they really describing a different reading of the reality? And that would obviously pose in terms of how we deal with it. So that's one question I would really, these two contrasts, disaffiliation and political polarization. The other one is, this Romina actually mentioned about the Beyond GDP initiative, both the UN group as well as this global alliance which has been set up. And then, of course, there has been this long tradition of the human development approach, which is also, so is there a meeting ground somewhere between these two at an international sort of level initiatives? You're looking at Beyond GDP. Are they trying to do something different? The human development is, of course, now looking at the technology, and you mentioned about the planetary sort of sustainability also. So these two questions, if the four of you would like to have some, are the reading of reality, is that part of the issue? Or is it the end goal are being thought of in other meeting grounds already? Are we coming at it from a sort of different disciplinary angles beyond GDP and the human development? Anyone, this time there's no similar sequence. Anyone who wants to go first, who can go first? Otherwise, I'll choose. Gala?
I can
okay, Pedro, yes.
Start. So
yeah.
I think the idea of going beyond GDP started almost from the moment that GDP emerged, right? It was always recognized even by the most orthodox economists and even the biggest proponents of GDP that it can only do so much. And actually, I should refer here to a recent book by a historian called David Engerman, And the book is called Apostles of Development. And he traces so he identifies six economists from South Asia, all of them actually, from different countries. And two of them, Abu Bulhak and Amartya Sen, are highlighted in the book. And he says he explains how from the 1950s, while they were students at Cambridge University, they were already thinking about the importance of going beyond GDP. So what I would say is that what emerged from that process that resulted in the Human Development Approach proposed in 1990 is one way of going beyond GDP. But I don't think, at least from where I sit and the kind of work that we do, that we aim at being a new hegemon, right? So Amartya Sen and Mahbubul Haq wanted to dethrone GDP. That's how they put it. And they proposed one index, the Human Development Index. But seeing things from today, in today's world, we also recognize the Human Development Index can only do so much. So I think it's better than GDP because it includes not only gross national income per capita, but also health and education. But it does a poor job at many other things, like taking account of sustainability challenges, for instance, or accounting for inequalities. So what we've been trying to do in our office as a contribution to this broader Beyond GDP effort that Romina and others have been leaders on is contributing to that thinking, to that process with ideas and with also with metrics. So some might be taken up as part of this process, others might be disregarded. But I think for us, for our work, it's important to see the human development thinking and metrics as an open-ended journey. I don't think there's a destination point where we're going to establish a metric or a set of metrics that is going to be better than GDP or the system of national accounts. We see our work as, ever evolving, dynamic, adjusted. And ultimately, I think the validity of these measures comes less from the technical aspects and more from the kind of views they have in society. And from that perspective, I think that the Human Development Index has been very widely validated. Thank you.
Gala, you had your hand first. Do you want to respond to this question or the other one about political polarization? Are you on mute? I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can.
Okay. So I was saying that I wanted to approach the first question you said regarding disaffiliation and polarization.
So can I then get Romini to, yeah, all right, Romina.
Okay, thank you very much. No, of course, I think, we every time that someone suggests sort of a new initiative on Beyond GDP, there is this issue of how that connects, articulates with the existing ones. But I would say, I think I'm pretty aligned with what Pedro just said in terms of seeing this as sort of open-ended journeys, but also as being sort of journeys and exercises that are fit for purpose in the sense that, you need specific metrics for doing specific things. And so even if I think the sort of conceptual discussion and the conceptual criticism, put towards GDP in a way was one conversation. The reality is that when you then want to replace GDP or you want to supplement GDP with alternative indicators, you can't just use one, single indicator, not even one set of indicators. And so this is why I think there are different ways to look at this issue. Although one of the important points here is that it's important to promote harmonization and some consistency across those approaches, and this is something that has been, I think, happening. So if you look at the way very concretely the statisticians and the policymakers are defining those broader concepts of welfare and well-being, again, the operational side of it is still quite diverse, but actually the underlying sort of principles are very often very similar, and that I think it is encouraging. I may have a slightly different perspective on national accounts than the one that Pedro just shared, because I do think that even if, again, the national accounts were never really conceived indeed to track welfare, they still play quite an important role. I think, in terms of the narrative, in terms of, the policy decisions that those, and the pin, etc. And I do think that there's been some effort by the ones, the custodians of the national accounts, to try to sort of integrate some additional elements that speak to people's well-being and sustainability. But I don't think that this has been done perhaps sufficiently. In the latest revision that was endorsed, in fact, this year, I think we do have a chapter on well-being and sustainability, but I don't think it is ambitious as it should be. Number one. And number two, it's not clear at all that countries will start actually implementing the revisions in that chapter in particular. So this is why the other indicators, the work that Pedro is doing, the work that the OECD is doing, and possibly the work that the UN will start doing once the UN high-level expert group will have finished the work, those continue to be pretty important. And it remains really, really key that all those different initiatives to connect to each other. And so I go back to the Global Alliance on Beyond GDP, which actually doesn't necessarily, came to life as a measurement initiative. I think it's really much about how we think. We can use those indicators in the context of the new discussions on international frameworks for cooperations and renewed thinking on financing for development. So it's really sort of starting with a vision to apply the metrics beyond GDP. But nevertheless, that alliance also wants to really promote this communication and connections across the existing initiatives. So I think it's important to make sure that there is obviously good overlap and so systematic connection being made.
Thank you. Gala.
Well, thank you, Hussein, for the question. I wanted to address the first part of the question that you posed regarding political polarization, Pedro's comments, and the disaffiliation. So I think that the concept in itself is different. Obviously, there is the concept of disaffiliation has more to do regarding the loss of the bonds between individuals themselves and with institutions, while the polarization has a lot to do with this huge divides that we're facing today, both political and ideological. But I do think that there are some commonalities. For one, both are symptoms of a failed model that are both highly driven by inequality and by the rising inequality that we're facing today. And they both also feed not only as a symptom, but also as a cause of intensifying some negative aspects of the model, today's model. And they both have a similar consequence, which is they both weaken the capacity that we have for collective action. And therefore, they both detrimental for us to have a greater well-being or a better future overall. I do think that there are also several commonalities in how to face them. There's quite a lot of literature regarding how to decrease political polarization. And there are many studies that have shown that when there is a greater knowledge between people, there is a decrease in polarization. And there's also obviously greater identification with one another and a possibility of building more trustful bonds between people. And therefore, both disaffiliation and polarization can decrease with a greater interaction. And it is much more effective if that interaction is face-to-face and if it's mediated through activities that can connect us closer to her humanity, not online, but face-to-face, and mostly linked to sports, arts, things that can touch us more emotionally, and therefore to enable us greater contact with our humanity. Therefore, the solutions on how can we decrease both disaffiliation and political polarization, I think, can feed into each other.
Thank you. I picked up one interesting thing from Claire's presentation, among the three types of change that you highlighted, Claire, one was that despite this great demand for system change, etc., but there was low support for alternatives. Is that telling us something, that particular statistics, that you have this demand for change, which seems to be very high, but low support for alternatives? Is that the challenge then? Is that is not a problem of end goal, but of the pathways to the end goals that we are really looking for? That's something that I would really like the panel to perhaps reflect, because I think that's a very interesting sort of a statistics loaded with some message. Claire, would you like to expand a little on that?
Yes, thank you. So I would say that what's happening is that there's a lack of awareness of these opportunities out there for change, because the system is geared to keep the status quo in place. So the vested interests are playing a big role in actually not allowing these alternative models to be truly explored. And one example I'd like to give, for instance, that goes back to Pedro Romina and Gala's point around the need for going beyond GDP, for instance. I was an observer of the French Climate Citizens Assembly, the Convention Citoyenne, and at the first weekend of the Convention, what the citizens from the Assembly brought up were the need to actually look at going beyond GDP, and that's something that unfortunately was not really deliberated upon in the Assembly itself. And Macron himself, actually, when the recommendation came out, said that the Assembly didn't really recommend moving beyond GDP, and so I think what we're seeing is that the opportunities to actually do justice to deliberation on these topics, which is really needed, and to some extent this is what the Global Citizens Assembly is trying to do, is how do you bring citizens into conversation on these contentious issues? What does going beyond GDP mean for people in the global south who live on less than $10 a day, which was 70% of the Assembly members were living on less than $10 a day. So what does that mean? What is degrowth for people who don't have very much to start with? And these are the kind of conversation we need. So I think the demand for change is there, but unfortunately the mechanisms, the institutions, don't allow us to actually grapple with the complexity of these questions. We fall into the traps of the polarization, people saying you don't want degrowth, this is bringing us back to the the olden days. And so I think this is where I think deliberation can help to address polarization.
Okay. Any other comment for the other? Just to assist you, I mean, Claire raised this issue of awareness gap. I mean, that's what you said, right? That there's a awareness gap I mean, this is I'm now in the global south, and people on the ground would contest the idea of awareness gap. There's powerlessness, but not lack of awareness. They understand the problem. They understand who are the barriers, but they don't have the sort of approaches, means, or knowledge resources by which to. So, any thoughts from our three other members? Would you like to? Yes, Gala? Are you on mute?
No, I need to be, can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
Okay,
Okay.
sorry. So yeah, I understand your point, Hussein, regarding the global south, and I share it. And I also think that in this global context, so affected by the Poli crisis, I think that the global south has also a lot to bring to the table due to our resilience in face of past crises. We are much used to facing uncertain contexts such as the one we are now, with many more possible vulnerabilities. And the main aspect that I think that the Global South can contribute is also having lot of experience on how to deal with these circumstances with very few resources and building on our collective action power. There are many experiences on how to rebuild social trust and re-engage communities into a social contract that can be hurt by bad results. And the experiences that have been built from community upwards in several southern countries are extremely rich for the whole world in this context on how to rebuild these ties and how to start understanding that we can all bring something to the table in order to build a future that's best for us all and to build a new horizon, such as this webinar is named. From concrete experiences, for instance, regarding care policies that are extremely interesting in many Latin American countries, such as the care blocks in Bogota, but many other experiences, or neighborhood with clubs that work to re-engage kids that might have been also involved in other activities or linked with crime or school dropouts, etc. So I think that we need to open a bit more the scope and understanding that there's not only not an awareness gap, but there's also many experiences that can be useful for the global north from global south experiences.
Thank you. Thank you for that. So I think we have had a round of observations and this exchange among the panelists. We might do a little change in the way we planned it. We thought of a second round right now, but I think let's have the Q&A right now so that the second round can benefit from some of the questions. So Q&A, those who are on the, I can see them on the screen. If any of you have any questions, please do unmute yourself and do that. And there is a option for those who are seeing this through Facebook or for YouTube. You can type your question here. I'm looking at the window where the question will pop up. Then we can direct it to our panelists. Would any of the members who are on the screen, would you have any comments or observations in this segment? Yes, Elisa? Unmute yourself.
Okay. No, I would like just to call attention to something that Claire brought to the discussion, which is the importance of to conceive of new forms of representation. Because I think one of the key issues we have to think about is that liberal democracy was conceived for a much smaller constituency. And there are so many of us now that representation is not contemplated for a large part of the population. And I think this fuels polarization, to come to Pedro's observation, because people who don't feel represented, they of course end up accepting leadership, authoritarian leadership, as a way to bypass the crisis of representation. That's my comment.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Anyone else here? No. And I don't see any question popping up on the window. So we'll go back to, for this final round, we'll go back to our panelists.
Can I share a
Yes,
reflection based
Pedro,
on,
please.
because I
Yes.
think what Elisa said is very important. And if I could bring in some historical perspective here.
Sure.
So if we look at, so I'll link it to monetary policy a little bit, but the point is not about the economic policy, but it's about the broader point, about the fact that the gold standard was in place until 1920s, 1930s, the interwar period. And part of the reasons why it was subject to stress was that the number of groups that were being part of the political process increased. So you didn't have only white men voting and basically running politics, but you started having also many more women. You start having trade unions, and that enlargement of the constituents in political process disrupt the gold standard and led to a lot of the economic instability that we saw in the 1920s and 1930s. So perhaps we are now going through something that bears some resemblance to this, and I think it also connects to your point, Hussein, about how do we link the local with the national and even the international, right? And the fact that people may not feel themselves represented by institutions or leaders at these higher levels at these higher scales when they confront local challenges that they feel are neglected. And my final reflection or maybe question is, so how do we connect then metrics like the discussion about beyond GDP into this very local reality, right? So that it doesn't become something abstract floating in our circles and really connects to people's lives.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Leticia, you have your hand up. You're mute.
Sorry. Now can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Well, I think what Gala says, voy a hablar en español. Gala, si tú puedes traducir. Creo que lo que dijo Gala sobre desafilación como una condición y individualismo, como una condición de las sociedades contemporáneas que tiene que ver con polarización y con otros males públicos, a mí me hace pensar en el trabajo de Elinor Ostrom y su escuela sobre bienes comunes. O sea, como subrayando, y fue muy importante lo que dijiste sobre la importancia de la confianza como núcleo de las interacciones sociales, como núcleo de la acción colectiva y la necesidad de acción colectiva para responder a los problemas contemporáneos. O sea, yo me pregunto, y creo que las experiencias en el sur global tienen mucho que ver con construir comunidad, con construir bienes comunes, bienes compartidos, acción colectiva, respuestas, movimientos sociales que son otra forma de bienes comunes. Y, y creo que un problema o un tema es cómo generar políticas públicas que apoyen esas iniciativas locales, colectivas, que construyen confianza. Ostrom decía que una forma de construir confianza es trabajar juntos. Y en las sociedades contemporáneas, no solo la sociedad está polarizada, sino pulverizada. Entonces, ¿cómo dar vuelta, cómo revertir esas tendencias, creando comunidad, creando bienes comunes como un objetivo, como un goal de políticas públicas? Ahora, en el sur global encontramos miles de estas experiencias que valdría la pena retomar. Entonces, también yo creo que no es tanto una falta de conciencia, sino una falta de visibilidad y una falta de subir escalas, de hacer de las acciones colectivas política pública. Gracias.
Thank you. Romina?
Yeah, I want to pick up on a few points. Very much second what's just been said, but first of all, perhaps picking upon the point of sort of global north and global south, and it's really true that there is a lot that the global south can share and with global north, and I think this is obviously very much at the core of the current discussions in rethinking international development. It is important to say that, again, some of the initiatives I just mentioned, but even within the OECD, which obviously has been for years sort of a bit perhaps promoting the interests of all in sort of global north, we are really rethinking this entirely in many different ways, and actually trying really to build bridges. We've done a number of projects. We are doing a number of projects. I mean, we did the big important project with Latin American countries precisely on well-being, because a lot was done, national level and local governments as well. So there are so many interesting stories of actually alternative visions and trajectories of development that I think global countries can really take lessons from and draw from. This is going to be, I think, to me, very core in all the conversations around post SDGs and how we get actually to 2030 in the best possible manner. The other point I wanted to comment was how we reconcile the sort of the perhaps higher level discussions on beyond GDP, the ones indeed that take place at international level and by necessity are a little bit, not macroeconomic, but very systemic in nature. We actually, with what local communities may, want to do. And actually, the answer is that is absolutely possible. And the discussions on beyond GDP, we're very many at local level. We did map all those initiatives, and Claire was mentioning the assembly in France, which of course the objective wasn't a conversation on beyond GDP, and yet they went there. But in many countries, actually, there have been a number of initiatives at local level, territorial level, city level, and many of those initiatives were very much participatory in nature. So really bringing all the stakeholders, the citizens, civil society organizations, and interestingly, those were revolving around the question is, how do we want to live? What is the society we want for us, for our children, for the future generations? The questions, I think, have been asked and answered in many different places, not just at international level. So it's important indeed that one establishes some bridges between the two. It's absolutely possible, and definitely I think one of the challenge of the work that the international community is doing there is to ensure that there is enough ownership from the local communities. Where I think, because I have, I had the direct experience of that type of participatory processes and deliberative democracies process, I think where it's very challenging is not so much on the vision and the goals. I think there is it's easier to agree on a sort of consensual vision on how we see the future is more sort of the means of implementation, the actual solutions. And I think that's where things start to become perhaps a little bit harder. So how we get to an agreement there, so how we facilitate the emergence of a consensus in terms of how do we, the means of implementation, how we get there. I think this is where it's sometimes a little bit harder. But I do think it's absolutely possible to combine sort of the international, the macroeconomic discussions with the one that is much more sort of local. To me, to go back to the point of information sort of gaps and whether this is a question of awareness, obviously we want to still feed the conversation with, so I think there is still an awareness gap, and actually the paradox is that we have a lot of data but not always we have the right information, as we all know. So we definitely want to address that gap, but it's not just about that. I think there is an issue of setting the incentives right. So when I hear about people being disenchanted and distrusting or mistrusting institutions, I think there is a problem of accountability of those institutions. And in many countries, I think we're seeing sort of democracy and working with very short-sighted political cycles where we can't manage to get institutions and rules and mechanisms actually that survive to the next cycle. And so I think we need to find a way to sort of ensure that so the government is there to promote well-being in a very persistent way. So beyond any specific coalition government. So I'm not convinced that today we have those type of rules, and even things such as constitutions or national legislations that in principle were designed precisely to go beyond that short time horizon are not always very effective. But I think again, to me the question is really how do we get the incentives right for those that have to enact the change.
Thank you. We are almost towards the end of this session. For the first our panelists, any final thoughts that we should take home? 1 minute type of final thoughts that you think are very important and we need to really devote our time to that. Anyone?
I'm happy to just go briefly.
Go ahead.
I've been starting to read recently this book by Luke Kemp called Goliath's Curse, which is about the history and future of a societal collapse. And it's interesting that in this conversation, the word collapse hasn't come up once. And for me, this is at the forefront of the work I'm doing, is how we are in collapse on so many levels. And how do we then support people to grapple with that and the complexity of it and what that means for the immediate future, not just the long-term future. And I think Luke Kemp's research is enlightening on that front.
Yala, any final 1 minute thought? Unmute yourself. Still unmute.
No, it's
Yeah.
can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, apologies. I'm also doing the interpretation. I do think that disaffiliation and polarization is fueling our collapse in terms of what Claire just mentioned. And I think that we need to understand how these factors are connected and how there's a concrete way of rebuilding trust, and that we need to understand that this is not only possible or desirable, but it's also instrumental to preserve life and to have a better future.
Okay. Pedro, any final thoughts?
First, I'm very impressed with Gala. She's both translating and contributing. That's very impressive. Thank you. Well, my final thought, and this didn't didn't come up, so I thought I should mention. It also relates to one of the findings of our latest report, or the one before. That's about the fact that actually people often agree on more than they think they do. So this issue of misperceptions, I think it's something that we can also explore and mobilize. I think Claire's kind of interventions are one way to get people to realize they actually agree on more than they think they do, but there might be others that we can explore. So it's possible to do better.
Thank you. Romina?
Yeah, I think I'm going to sort of say what is my main takeaway from this discussion, and so very much building on the points that were made by Pedro. So I'm looking forward to read your report in terms of those better futures, because we need to ensure that we have a much more sort of inspiring narrative. So narrative needs to be less polarizing, and I think if we can inspire, provide inspiration, that's really, really, really very important. And maybe to make the connection with what Gala said, a narrative that also not just sort of shows plausible positive futures, but actually is there to speak to our common sense of belonging and sense of connectedness, which I think we all want to sort of enhance in this very difficult moment. So I do hope that part of the report Pedro is going to say how we should do that. But thank you so much, everyone, for this very, very interesting conversation.
Thank you. Thank you, Gala, Romina, Claire, and Pedro. I think we had a very interesting discussion. Obviously, it wasn't meant to really come up with a big solution of any sort, but it was meant to assess how we are reading the realities. Are we really capturing the main challenges? What are the main areas of action in terms of going forward? And in terms of simply my takeaway and in a way wrapping up here, I see that, three boxes we really, or three circles in which we did talk. One is about voices, new forms of representation, new forms of coalition building. So that's one action space, which is, I think, which came up quite strongly. The other was about end goals, beyond GDP, human development, linking up with planetary health, etc. So end goals is another let's say, knowledge space or this discussion space that we really talked about. The third came in not so in bits and pieces, which was about really the pathways, the process aspect, this macro micro necessity for this macro micro linkage, and how that I really declared data on low support for alternatives tells me a big message that the process is as important as end goals and in terms of voices. So we really have to attend to that. There was one box which actually didn't come up at all in this discussion, which is about public policy. Maybe we have a fatigue on that, or we don't have much faith in that box, but we can leave it for another day. That public policy, has it lost its value? Or I think it's one area where we may need to, again, give some attention and come up with a new way of articulating that particular box. So I think this was a very interesting discussion, and I should add that we should feel collectively quite satisfied that the inaugural session of the New Horizon webinar has really taken off, and the next seminars which will come in this series will hopefully I'm sure will be equally captivating and grab attention. Perhaps in the next round we will see how to get the Q&A from the audience into the discussion. There was one about whether it's a crisis of capitalism or crisis of democracy. It came in too late for us to really address that question, but let's leave it at that. Exactly, we are finishing on the dot in terms of our allotted time. Thank you all so much for such engaging and fruitful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for hosting. Bye.